This video is about using Android Studio to make a constraint layout. Here we are looking at the layout, the activity_main XML of a Hello World project. So if we look on the left-hand side in the sort of project pane, we can see that the RES, the resources tab is expanded, and under that the layout is expanded, and there we see activity_main XML. So we've double-clicked on that to open up the layout. On the upper right, you have these various tabs, these various ways of looking at the layout. We are currently looking at it in design view. Where you see circled at the top, activity_main XML, under that you can see a palette of sort of widgets, things that you can drag out and put onto the layout. And then under that, the component tree. So this constraint layout is going to be a tree. There's going to be one root, the constraint layout, and then everything will be in some other container. So right now all we have is a text view, or I'll often refer to it as a label. It is contained in the constraint layout. It is a child of the constraint layout. If we look over at the white rectangle, we see that that text view, that label, is constrained. Those circles around it are the top constraint, the bottom constraint, the left constraint, and the right constraint. And all those circles are filled in, and then we have this zigzaggy blue line connecting it to its parent, to the container, and those are the constraints. We will see that every widget must have a sort of horizontal and a vertical constraint. This one in particular happens to have two horizontals, a left and a right, and two verticals, a top and a bottom constraint. When we are in this design view of the layout, we see on the rightmost panels, we have a sort of list of the attributes, starting at the top with the declared attributes. So these are the things, when we look at the code, we are going to see that these are the attributes that are explicitly declared and initialized. And so toward the top, it has certain sort of declared attributes, certain common attributes that get used. But if we scroll down to the bottom of this list, we will find an expandable list that says all the attributes. So then it will be a very long list of sort of every attribute that we might be able to affect this text view, this Hello World text view. So here we are looking at that attribute pane with the all attributes expanded, and we see it's this very long alphabetized list. And so the top categories are sort of more useful if you're working with the common attributes, but if you don't find at the top what you're looking for, then expand this all attribute list, and it is sorted alphabetically typically. And so, as we've said, this is a constraint layout, and the widgets have to be constrained at least once horizontally and once vertically. We see that in the sort of pictorial picture of the white rectangle in the middle there, you can see the constraints and the blue filled in circles and the zigzag lines, and you can see it in the attribute list up in the declared attributes. So you see a bunch of layout_constraint attributes, and they are all the values of those are all the parent. So all the constraints in this case are to the parent, because it's the only other thing right now in the Hello World project. The only thing you can be constrained to is the parent. That won't be the case once we have multiple widgets. If we choose the constraint layout itself within the tree, then we aren't going to find any constraints where there's no constraint diagram, there's no constraint attributes, because there's nothing for it to be constrained to. Things can be constrained to the layout, but the layout is not constrained to anything itself. Returning to the Hello World text view, the label, we can also look at, in the attribute pane, the constraint widget. So it shows that, again, now they're gray solid filled in, that it's constrained to things. And then there are also these drop-down lists where you can have numbers, and those will be the margins. So you can be constrained to the sort of left of the container, and that will move you all the way over to the left of the container, or you can put in a little margin, so you can be 8 units from the left of the margin. So right now those are all zeros, but those could be some other number and give you a bit of a margin. And now we're looking at that hello world text view label in the code view. So here's an element in our XML. It says announce, it's an open angle bracket. It says text view. And then we can see there that there are attributes of this element, and they are app : layout _ constraint bottom, and it's to the bottom of the parent, and app : layout _ constraint left to the left of parent, etc. So we have a text version of those constraints in the XML. So we deleted the old hello world text view. We sort of highlighted that object, hit the delete key, it was gone. And now we've gone to the palette and found a text view, and we're going to drag a new text view onto our layout. We can see that that new text view is unconstrained. If we're looking at the white rectangle, we see that the circles are not filled in, and we don't have any blue lines attaching it to anything else, constraining it to something else. So it is not constrained. It will need to be constrained at least once horizontally and once vertically. And it's important to understand that we're looking at a picture of what the layout looks like, but it is not a WYSIWYG designer. It is not a what you see is what you get. So the constraints are important and needed, and so we must complete that before we proceed. Here we are looking at that same text view that we just dragged out over in the code view, and we see that we're getting a red squiggly line, and that is informing us that there's an error, that this is a constraint layout and this must be constrained, and it's not constrained. So it is in its own way telling us about this error that we're making so far. I typically will design a constraint layout sort of in the way that I would read it, so starting at the top left. So this being our first widget that we've dragged out, I'm going to constrain it to the top of my container and to the left of my container. So I can do that in this design view by clicking on those circles, those constraint circles that are around it, and then dragging to what I want to constrain it to. In this case, my only option is the container. And then I can use on the constraint widget thing, or seen over on the right, I can use that drop down list and give it some number if I don't want it to be exactly at the top, but I want a little bit of space before the top if I want some kind of margin. Similarly, I'm going to drag a circle on the left over to the left of the container and also give it a little bit of spacing. Again, they don't have to both be 24. That was just some decision on my part. And then I have over on the right, you see it in code view now, and you can see the constraint layouts, that it is, there's a start and a top constraint layout, and they are both to the parent down there at the bottom. I'm going to next give the text view an ID. When I give an ID or change an ID, I usually get a pop-up about refactoring, and I say OK. And then I also found the text property, and I changed it to name. So this text view is going to serve as a label that is prompting the user to enter a name in what will come next, which will be an edit text. Next, I have dragged out a plain text edit text onto the layout. You see at this stage, it has the white circles. It is unconstrained. So by edit text, we mean that the user can type in it, the user can edit it. And by plain text, we mean that the user can write just about anything in it. There are other things down below you'll see where they are prompted to specifically type in a number or a date or an email. This is sort of one line of any text. My edit text at this stage is unconstrained, and I must give it at least 2 constraints, one horizontal and one vertical. I'm going to give it vertical constraint it to the top of the parent. So I'm going to highlight the circle at the top and drag up to the top of the container. And once again, I didn't want it exactly at the top of the container, so I use that little drop down that you're seeing over on the lower right to give it a little bit of a margin. Then the left side, horizontally, I'm going to take the left side of the new edit text, and I'm going to constrain it to the right of the text view that I previously had put down. And also I'm going to give it a little bit of margin using that drop-down list in the constraint widget you see in the lower right. If you look on the lower right of that white rectangle representing the layout, you will see a place where you can magnify the layout. And so I've hit the plus a few times to increase it and be able to see. And now I can see a sort of a squiggly line connecting the edit text to the text view. So that is my constraint, my horizontal constraint on the edit text is constraining it to the right of the text view. It just gives me a more magnified, a better view of it. So here we are looking at the result in code, and we see that the edit text has its layout constraints. Those attributes are seen at the bottom, and we see that the layout underscore constraint start to end of is equal to quote at plus ID slash TV name. So that is the ID that we gave to the text view. So it is constrained horizontally to the text view, which has an ID of TV name. In this demo, we're going to show one more widget, in this case, another text view, and we are going to drag it down. We're going to set up for prompting the user for an email. So we are going to have a text view, a label, and says email, and we are going to constrain it horizontally to the container so that it is on the left, but give it a little bit of margin. And we're going to constrain it vertically to the bottom of the edit text. The edit text takes a little bit more room vertically, and so to give us a better use of the space, I am constraining the text view to the bottom of the edit text. It would be happy if I constrained it to the name text view, or even if I constrained it to the layout, but I want to constrain it to the sort of tallest thing in the previous row, if you will. So that's just sort of my choice. It will insist that you constrain twice. It won't care what you constrain it twice to. So these are just sort of my particular design decisions. And just here we are looking at it in the code view. So that text view we just added, we're looking at the constraint layouts in the bottom. That's what we've been focusing on. And the layout underscore constraint start is to the start of the parent. So I keep calling it the container, but the container is the parent in the tree. And then the second constraint, the vertical constraint, it's layout underscore constraint top to the bottom of the edit text. And we identified the edit text based on its ID, which was tname.